There is a virus that has infected over 250 million people worldwide. By comparison, about 35 million people are infected with HIV.
Now live to Capitol Hill for a hearing on hepatitis C and what the federal government is doing to fight it. That's Tom Davis. He's chairman of the House Government Reform Committee, and they're holding this hearing just getting underway. Live coverage here on C-SPAN.
Viral infection in the United States, affecting nearly 4 million Americans.
In the United States alone, over 4 million people are infected with hepatitis C.
Why am I sitting here, a member of Congress, probably as ignorant about it as the average American?
Within the next 20 years, the amount of hepatitis C that we'll be diagnosing is going to triple.
To an incredible 30,000 deaths per year.
This is a major public health issue in the United States and around the world.
This is a huge public health issue. It's a tsunami in terms of cost.
We are looking at an epidemic for hepatitis C. So, 250,000 people, but in 10 years, gonna need it, and we do about 7,000.
Done.
I resisted getting tested back then because I had seen the interferon. One of my friends who was diagnosed went through the treatment and it didn't work for him. Back then, there was a 6% chance of a good outcome because the interferon was, you just did interferon, it was every day, and it was a nightmare. And so I thought even if I did know that I had it, it probably wasn't worth knowing. But eventually it just sort of weared on me, and I went in, I got a buddy of mine who was an emergency room doc to test me. Now back in those early days, the diagnostics were not good. So there was a 50-50 chance, I didn't know this at the time, that I would be misdiagnosed, which I was. And I was told I didn't have it. So when I walked into a doctor's office in 2000 in Los Angeles, 17 years sober, having thought I had dodged this bullet, really, been told that I had dodged the bullet. When he said, I'm going to test you for HIV and HCV, which is hepatitis C, I said, you can give me an HIV test because I'd never had one, but don't bother about the HCV. Because I don't have it. I was told by a doctor that I didn't have it. And he said, well, I'm going to test you anyways. No, I didn't have any elevated liver function tests. My liver function was fine. So, and usually when you go into a primary care doc today or an internist, they'll give you liver function tests. And if you're elevated, they may test you for this depending on what you tell them about your history. But I had told them the truth about my history back in my teens. I had used drugs and IV drugs and inhalant drugs. And the litmus test for most docs is, do you have elevated liver function? And I did not have elevated. So there was no reason for this guy other than he was just that kind of a doctor. His name was Rob Huizinga, and he was he said, I'm testing you anyways. And I said, knock yourself out. And I left, and I thought I'd never hear from him again. 3 days later or 4 days later, however long later, I got a call from him, and he said, I got good news and I got bad news. And I'm telling you, that's not what you want to hear from a doctor. And I said, well, what's the good news? Because I need good news for. He said, you don't have HIV. And I said, well, what's the bad news? And he said, you do have hepatitis C. And I was floored. Both addiction and hepatitis C have huge stigma and shame issues to overcome for a lot of folks. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been in recovering communities where people have come up to me and said, you talk about your hepatitis C publicly? And I said, yes. And they go, well, I don't. And they talk about their addiction publicly. So these are huge issues for people to overcome. In terms of the getting treated part of it, you're in a doctor's office and your doctor goes, did you ever use IV drugs? I mean, now, inhalant drugs also is a possibility, but those are questions that people have a difficult time remembering if they did sometimes, maybe, admitting to, even 20 years later. And if you don't tell your doctor, chances are they're not going to test you for this. I mean, they're not going to test you unless you have elevated liver function tests. Really important for people who are who may be at risk, who have had one of the potential exposures to hepatitis C, and those are IV or inhalant drug use, tattoos, really serious sexual promiscuity. Some studies suggest 9% chances of transmission that way, multiple partners, especially gay sex. Those folks are obviously at a little bit of a higher risk. So those issues, or blood transfusions prior to 1992, that you let your doctor know so they can do it. The problem is not only is there stigma and shame on the patient side, but there's a lot of reluctance for the primary care docs, the guys on the front lines, to address this issue. From my own experience, if Rob Huizenga hadn't just had an instinct to test me, he had no reason to test me. I mean, because he just wanted to see for himself. And if he hadn't done that, I might not be sitting here today. I mean, the truth is, my disease had progressed to a point where if I didn't know it, I could have woken up one day, and I know people like this then they're yellow. And they wonder what's going on, and they're cirrhotic, and their liver's failing. And that's the first time they have any inkling that they're sick. So, and then it's too late, by the way, usually. So, the shame part of this and the stigma part for someone like me to go out and talk about it seems to, make it okay because it's an illness. People make lifestyle choices at points in their life. They shouldn't be punished, and they sure shouldn't be allowed to die because of those choices.